120,000 Ottoman soldiers marched into the plains of Eastern Europe, cannons, banners, and the Sultan's pride blazing under the autumn sun. Facing them was a starving army one-third their size, Poles, Lithuanians, and rough Cossack warriors, outnumbered, undersupplied, dug in behind wooden walls near a fortress called Khotyn. For over a month, wave after wave of Ottoman attacks crashed against their wooden walls, and yet the line never broke. By the time the smoke cleared, tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers lay dead on the fields near the Nesta River. And what was supposed to be a glorious conquest had turned into a disaster that broke the spirit of an empire. This is the forgotten story of how Poland stopped 120,000 Ottomans and changed the fate of Europe. Welcome to Heroic History, your daily dive into the incredible world of warfare. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe because in this episode we'll uncover how the Ottomans assembled one of the largest invasion forces of the 17th century and why it failed. How Poland and its allies turned a hopeless defense into one of the most unlikely victories in European history. And finally, how the collapse of this campaign exposed deep cracks inside the Ottoman system and led directly to the shocking assassination of Sultan Osman II. Let's find out. By the early 1600s, the borderlands between Poland, Lithuania, and the Ottoman Empire, especially the small Principality of Moldavia, had become one of the most volatile frontiers in Europe. Moldavia sat like a buffer zone wedged between two giants, both claiming influence over it. For centuries, it had been a vassal of Poland. But by the mid-1500s, the Ottomans had gradually extended their control, turning Moldavia into one of their satellite states. Two powerful empires pulling on the same small territory like a rope, and neither willing to let go. Polish magnates, wealthy nobles who often commanded private armies, began meddling directly in Moldavian politics. They installed rulers called hospodars, who were loyal to Poland rather than to Constantinople. This was more than political theatre. It was a direct challenge to Ottoman authority. Each time Poland interfered, the Ottomans saw it as provocation. You can probably guess what happened next. Diplomacy tried and failed. In 1617, both sides tried to calm things down. They signed what's known as the Treaty of Busa or Jaruga, a deal meant to stabilize the border once and for all. Under it, Poland agreed to renounce its claims over Moldavia. In exchange, the Ottomans promised to restrain their Tatar allies who constantly raided Polish lands. But here's where it gets messy. The treaty also demanded that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth stop the Zaporozhian Cossacks from raiding Ottoman territory. That was easier said than done. If you've never heard of the Cossacks, imagine frontier warriors, tough, fiercely independent men who lived along the Dnieper River, far from the reach of any central government. They were technically under Polish rule, but in practice they obeyed no one but their own leaders. These guys were expert horsemen, deadly with a saber, and masters of the river. Their trademark was the chaika, a small, fast boat that could slip along rivers and even out onto the Black Sea. In the early 1600s, these boats carried out raids so bold they sound almost unreal. In 1614, the Cossacks stormed the port of Sinop, burning the Ottoman fleet there to ashes. 6 years later, in 1620, they hit Varna, another key Ottoman port. And in 1624, they even sailed down the Bosphorus, raiding the outskirts of Istanbul itself, right under the Sultan's nose. To put it bluntly, they were a nightmare for the Ottoman government and a diplomatic disaster for Poland. Constantinople accused the Commonwealth of breaking the Treaty of Busa. From the Ottoman point of view, the Cossacks were Polish agents, a convenient way for the Commonwealth to attack without officially declaring war. But the truth was more complicated. Warsaw didn't control them at all. This situation reveals something deeper about Eastern Europe at that time. A region where the power of states was often undermined by private armies and semi-independent warlords. Violence wasn't fully centralized. In other words, small groups could start big wars, and in 1620, that's exactly what happened. To teach a lesson to the Ottomans and secure Moldavia once again, the Commonwealth launched a campaign under Grand Hetman Stanisław Żółkiewski, an old veteran in his 70s. But the move was reckless. In September 1620, at the Battle of Khotyn, his army, roughly 7,000 to 8,000 men, faced a vastly superior Ottoman Tatar force estimated at 20,000 to 30,000. The result was catastrophic. Żółkiewski's army was surrounded, cut down during its retreat, and the old hetman himself was killed in the chaos. His severed head was sent to the Sultan as proof of victory. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a humiliation. The Polish-Lithuanian army had been wiped out, and the road into Moldavia and possibly into Poland itself now lay open. The Sultan Osman II, only 17 years old, but eager to prove himself, saw his chance. In his eyes, the Commonwealth had broken every promise, letting the Cossacks run wild, meddling in Moldavia and now attacking Ottoman territory. So he prepared a massive invasion to punish them. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For the Commonwealth, this wasn't just another border skirmish, it was a fight to restore national honor after Khotyn. So why did they choose Khotyn for this decisive battle? If you look at a map, Khotyn, or Chochim, sits high on the western bank of the Dniester River, its stone fortress watching over the river like a sentinel. Back then, it wasn't just a pretty piece of scenery, it was the key to the entire northern route from the Ottoman Empire into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. To get a sense of how strategic it was, picture this. From Constantinople or Adrianople, an Ottoman army moving north had only one real, reliable route into Polish territory. That road cut through Moldavia, crossed the Dniester, and then passed directly by Khotyn. Beyond that lay Kamieniec Podolski, the strongest Polish fortress in Podolia, and after that the open plains leading to Lwów, modern Lviv, and eventually Kiev itself. So if the Ottomans could take Khotyn, they wouldn't just secure Moldavia. They'd plant a permanent military foothold inside Europe's frontier, a forward base to launch campaigns deeper into the continent. They could pressure the Habsburgs from the east, threaten Transylvania and Upper Hungary, and even coordinate with anti-Habsburg factions in Central Europe. It's no exaggeration to say that if Osman II had won decisively at Khotyn, the map of Europe might look very different today. He could have dominated the Black Sea's northern coast, controlled vital supply routes between east and west, and forced Poland, Lithuania, and perhaps even Austria into submission. For the Commonwealth, that was unthinkable. It was the perfect place and the last place to make a stand. Spring 1621, and the largest Ottoman army seen in decades begins to move north. Imagine the scene. Endless lines of soldiers, wagons, artillery, horses and camp followers stretching for miles across the Balkans, somewhere between 120,000 and 160,000 men. Sources vary, but even the lowest estimate is staggering. March out of Constantinople and Adrianople, led personally by Sultan Osman II, who was still only 17 years old. Up north, the Commonwealth was preparing too. The Polish-Lithuanian forces were a fraction of Osman's army. Altogether, they could muster about 25,000 regular soldiers, a mix of Polish infantry, artillery crews, and roughly 4,800 Lithuanian infantry and 3,500 Lithuanian cavalry. They were joined by 20,000 to 25,000 Zaporozhian Cossacks, led by Petro Sahaydachny, one of the most capable commanders in Eastern Europe. That brought the total force to roughly 45,000 to 50,000 men, still outnumbered at least 3 to 1. The Ottomans had a massive army with elite Janissaries, Sipahi cavalry, Tatar horsemen, and even contingents from Moldavia and Wallachia. Their Kapakulu Corps alone, the Sultan's household troops, numbered about 34,825, including 18,000 Janissaries. Why would anyone stand and fight against such odds? Instead of marching out into the open and being swallowed up by the Ottoman tide, the Commonwealth Army took a very different approach. Under the command of the brilliant Grand Hetman of Lithuania, Jan Karol Chodkiewicz, they built what was essentially a fortified city of earth and timber. Their camp was set up near the fortress of Khotyn, between the cliffs of the Dniester and the rolling hills behind them, a perfect natural barrier. The river covered one side of their position and allowed supply boats to come in from friendly territory. That alone was a lifesaver, because autumn in Eastern Europe meant one thing: mud, rain, and disease. Armies that moved too far from supply lines usually starved. Chodkiewicz's men dug in. They built a semicircular line of fortifications in front of the fortress, facing the Ottomans. The fortress itself sat just behind them, acting as a stone anchor point, their last fallback. The defensive line was divided into three sectors: the right wing commanded by Chodkiewicz himself, the center led by Prince Władysław Wasa, the king's son, and the left wing under Stanisław Lubomirski. But this wasn't just a wall of dirt and timber. It was a masterpiece of the 17th century field engineering. The main rampart stood about 9 to 12 min high. That's roughly 3 stories tall, with multiple dry ditches in front, some as wide as 24 meters across. Think about having to charge across open ground, then climb a 70 ft wide ditch and scale an earthen wall under musket and cannon fire. In front of the ramparts were palisades, wooden stakes sharpened to a point, and a bâtisse, felled trees with their branches left facing outward like giant barbed wire. Behind those walls, the defenders had their artillery ready: light field guns for direct fire and heavier cannons for long-range bombardment. About 17 underground chambers or mines were reportedly dug beneath the most threatened sectors, probably for storing gunpowder or to blow up attackers who got too close. Out front, 2 advanced camps stood apart from the main line, one held by the Cossacks and another by the notorious Lithuanians, a band of Polish-Lithuanian mercenaries known for their ferocity. These forward outposts acted like tripwires, forcing the Ottomans to fight their way through layers of resistance before even touching the main defenses. And within those defenses was one of the Commonwealth's secret weapons, the tabora system. A moving fortress made of wagons chained together. The Cossacks had perfected this mobile defense, using it to form walls of wagons, each equipped with small cannons or muskets, firing from behind wooden shields. It gave them flexibility. They could open the line for a cavalry countercharge and close it again in minutes. By late August, Ottoman scouts and Tatar vanguards were already testing the Commonwealth's lines. Skirmishes broke out almost daily. Quick raids, small cavalry charges, probing attacks meant to reveal weaknesses. On August 27th, a small Cossack cavalry unit launched a daring assault on the Ottoman advance guard. It was almost suicidal. They rode straight into the mass of enemy horsemen, cutting down many Turks before being overwhelmed. Nearly the entire Cossack unit was wiped out, but their attack had bought time and rattled the enemy. 4 days later, on August 31st, the Ottoman cavalry counterattacked, hoping to trap and isolate the remaining Commonwealth scouts, but the plan fell apart. The Ottomans couldn't break through the Commonwealth screening forces or divide their army. The defenders held firm for now. Still, it wasn't looking good. The Ottomans, led by Sultan Osman II himself, had perhaps 100,000 men. Some sources say even more when you count camp followers and auxiliaries. The Commonwealth, on the other hand, had maybe 35,000 regular troops and another 25,000 to 30,000 Cossacks expected to arrive eventually. But as August turned to September, those reinforcements were nowhere in sight. Every man in Chodkiewicz's camp could feel the pressure. Supplies were short, the enemy lines were tightening, and everyone knew if the Cossacks didn't show up soon, they'd be crushed. Then, just when things looked like they were about to collapse, something remarkable happened. On September 1st, 1621, a wall of dust showed up on the horizon, and from them rode tens of thousands of Cossacks. Rough, battle-hardened warriors under the leadership of Hetman Petro Sahaidatni, streaming across the steppe to join the fight. They took up position on the Commonwealth's right flank near the unfinished trenches and instantly turned the tide. That single arrival changed everything. The Cossacks fought like no one else on that battlefield. They fortified their sector with wagons, a tabora as they called it, creating a moving fortress of chained carts lined with musketeers and small cannon. When Ottoman cavalry charged, they met walls of gunfire. When the Ottomans tried to storm the trenches, the Cossacks counterattacked, sometimes at night, sneaking into the enemy camp and torching supplies. And here's a wild detail. During the campaign, the Cossacks deposed Hetman Yukim Borodavka right there in the field. He'd failed disastrously in the Moldavian campaign the year before, and the men weren't about to follow him again. They elected Sahaidatni on the spot, a brutal but efficient act that showed how self-governing and pragmatic the Cossacks were. They didn't waste time arguing over hierarchy or orders. They acted. They weren't subordinates of the Commonwealth. They were partners. And their performance in the days that followed proved it. The siege of Khotyn began in earnest on September 2nd. That day, the Ottomans tried to strike before the Cossacks could finish building their defenses, but the attack was beaten back with heavy losses. The next day, September 3rd, Ottoman forces launched multiple assaults. One against the flank held by Prince Lubomirski's troops, another directly against the Cossack camp. Both failed. By evening, the Cossacks counterattacked and even managed to capture several Ottoman cannons, dragging them back behind their wagon lines. On September 4th, the Ottomans tried again, throwing wave after wave of infantry and cavalry into the trenches. Once again, failure. The Cossacks' musket volleys tore through the attackers while the Polish artillery pounded them from the hills. The ground in front of the Cossack camp was said to be littered with thousands of Ottoman dead. And the siege was only beginning. The Ottomans were throwing in everything they had. Waves of janissaries, the elite infantry of the empire, backed by field artillery and flanked by Sipahi cavalry and Tatar horsemen. Each attack came in carefully coordinated waves. First, the guns opened up, pounding the Polish and Cossack defenses with thunderous barrages. Then, as the smoke still hung over the battlefield, the infantry surged forward, trying to fill in the defensive ditches and tear down the wooden palisades that ringed the camp. But each time they hit a wall of fire. The defenders had their cannons placed perfectly, and every time the janissaries tried to advance, they were met with a storm of musket balls and grape shot. The Ottoman soldiers tried again and again, climbing over bodies, pushing forward under hellish fire, and were thrown back with terrible losses. One particularly brutal assault targeted the Cossack sector right at the center of the defensive line. The janissaries hoped to smash through before the Cossacks could regroup, but the attack was met with a ferocious counterfire. The Cossacks' muskets and small cannon tore gaps through the Ottoman ranks until the attackers simply broke apart. Still, the Ottomans didn't quit. They reorganized, pulled back, and launched another mixed assault, cavalry and infantry together this time. But no matter how hard they pushed, the Commonwealth line held. Then, just when everyone thought the night would bring peace, disaster struck. On September 7th, under cover of darkness, a group of elite janissaries, perhaps a few hundred men, slipped across the battlefield and crept toward the Polish camp. Around midnight, they burst in, swords flashing in the torchlight. The attack was pure chaos. About 100 Polish soldiers were cut down in the confusion before reinforcements rushed in and drove the janissaries out. It was a close call, and a reminder that even the smallest crack in discipline could be fatal. The next day, September 8th, the tables turned. A detachment of Ottoman and Tatar cavalry ambushed a Cossack supply convoy, but the Cossacks were ready. Using the terrain to their advantage, low ridges, wagon barricades, and cleverly placed musketeers, they turned the ambush around. When the smoke cleared, roughly 3,000 Janissaries lay dead. The Ottomans had lost another elite formation. Those back-to-back failures started to break Ottoman morale. And through it all, the Cossacks took the brunt of the fighting. Day after day, wave after wave, they absorbed the first and fiercest attacks. They were the shield that kept the Polish heart of the army intact, and they paid for it in blood. But their stubborn defense gave Chodkiewicz time to plan his counterblows. Now let's talk about the Winged Hussars, the Commonwealth's most famous unit. These guys were the rock stars of European cavalry, armored head to toe, riding massive war horses and carrying long lances built to pierce through multiple men in one charge. Each lance was about 16 to 20 ft long. Imagine that coming at you at full gallop. Their job was never to hold a line. It was to shatter one. And that's exactly what they did. Whenever Ottoman or Tatar cavalry overextended, the Hussars struck. One of the most spectacular moments came on September 9th. The Ottomans had massed about 10,000 men, mostly Sipahi cavalry, for a heavy push on a key position held by Chodkiewicz himself. The Polish commander gathered 3 squadrons of cavalry, around 600 to 650 men, mostly winged hussars by reiters, a kind of armored pistol cavalry. It was a tiny force compared to what they faced, but Chodkiewicz didn't hesitate. He gave the order to charge. The ground trembled as the hussars lowered their lances and thundered forward. They smashed straight into the Ottoman cavalry's front line, piercing through it like a spear through silk. Within minutes, the Sipahis were in chaos. Some tried to turn and fight, others bolted back toward their camp. When it was over, the Ottomans had lost over 500 men, killed, trampled or captured, the Commonwealth about 30. And from there, the Cossacks kept the pressure up. Between September 18th and 22nd, they launched a series of night raids into the Ottoman camp. On the nights of the 18th and 21st, they attacked the tents of Ottoman commanders, setting fires, stealing horses, and spreading panic. Each raid might have killed dozens or hundreds, but their true power was psychological. The Ottoman camp no longer felt safe. Meanwhile, the Sultan's massive army was running into another kind of enemy: logistics. On paper, Osman II had brought an unstoppable host, perhaps 100,000 soldiers with 2,300 cannons, and the massive train of engineers, servants, cooks and animals that came with them. But out in the muddy plains near Khotyn, that strength turned into a burden. The autumn rains made the roads almost impassable. The heavy siege guns, each weighing several tons, sank into the mud. Horses died by the hundreds. To get some of the artillery into position, the Ottomans even built a temporary bridge across the Dniester River, a massive engineering effort, but it took days, left them exposed and accomplished little, and then came the food problem. Feeding an army of that size required something like 200 tons of grain a day. And that's not even counting the horses. Every wagon, every barge from the Black Sea was essential. But Cossack raiders kept slicing into those supply lines, ambushing convoys, torching granaries and killing teamsters. Before long, the Ottomans were short on everything: grain, horse fodder, even clean water. The battlefield itself had become a nightmare. The autumn rains came early that year, turning the fields into thick, sucking mud. Horses began to die first, collapsing in their own harnesses. Soon after, men started dying too, not from battle, but from disease. Dysentery, fever, infection, the invisible enemies that thrive in crowded camps. Weeks of failed assaults had shattered confidence. Every attack against the Polish-Lithuanian lines had ended the same way, in heaps of bodies and no progress. Supplies were running out. The soldiers were exhausted, and infighting broke out among Ottoman commanders. Units blamed each other, tempers flared. The Janissaries, once the proud shock troops of the empire, were muttering openly against their sultan. So, as the rain turned to sleet, the great Ottoman army began to crumble from the inside. By the end of September, Sultan Osman launched one last desperate offensive, a massive assault on September 28th, throwing in every remaining reserve. The battlefield shook with cannon fire, but once again, the defenders, Poles, Lithuanians, and Cossacks held their ground. After a day of carnage, the Ottoman forces fell back, leaving thousands of dead behind. Nearly 40,000 Ottoman soldiers had been killed or wounded since the campaign began. That's almost half the army. Their supply wagons were empty, their animals dead, and snow was beginning to fall. Osman II had no choice but to negotiate. Inside the Polish camp, the situation was bittersweet. The great hetman Jan Karol Chodkiewicz, the man who had held the army together through impossible odds, was dying. He'd been sick for most of the campaign, too weak to ride, sometimes barely able to speak. Even so, he kept command until the very end, directing battles from his tent and coordinating with the Cossacks. By late September, his illness worsened. He called his officers together, gave them final instructions, and told them to hold the line until the enemy broke. Then, quietly, he died. On September 24th, 1621, 2 weeks before the treaty was signed, his men buried him near the walls of Khotyn, in the mud and smoke of the camp he had defended. For the Commonwealth, Chodkiewicz's death was the price of survival. But for the Ottoman Empire, Khotyn was the spark that ignited something far worse, a full-blown political crisis. On October 9th, 1621, both sides signed the Treaty of Khotyn. Both sides agreed to go back to the status quo. No one gained any territory. The fortress of Khotyn, that massive stronghold the Ottomans had tried so hard to capture, was handed back to Moldavia, which at the time was under Ottoman administration. And the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth promised to stay out of Moldavian politics in the future. Despite the lack of territorial gains, the Poles and Cossacks saw this as a great victory. Why? Because they had done the impossible. They'd stopped the largest Ottoman invasion Europe had ever seen up to that point. For the Commonwealth, it was proof that Europe's eastern shield still held firm. For the Ottomans, however, it was a humiliation. The defeat shook the Ottoman Empire to its core. Sultan Osman II was furious. He was a ruler who had just lost a war against a smaller opponent, and everyone knew it. He blamed the defeat not on his own command or the odds, but on his janissaries, the once elite infantry corps that had become politically powerful and resistant to change. Osman wanted to reform them, modernize the army, make it disciplined again, break the old traditions that in his eyes had made it soft. The janissaries, of course, weren't about to let a boy sultan dismantle their privileges. In 1622, just months after the Khotyn campaign, they mutinied. They stormed the palace, overthrew Osman II, and brutally assassinated him, the first Ottoman sultan ever killed by his own troops. It sent shockwaves through the empire. From that moment, the Janissaries' stranglehold on Ottoman politics only grew stronger, and their decline as a true fighting force began. Thanks for staying with me through this story. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you tomorrow with another chapter of history.